Okay, you got 44 seconds, 43 seconds, 40 seconds. Okay, you got. Oh, I hear myself repeating it back in Facebook just now. Had turned the volume down on the computer. The pewter. If the kids up north used to do, they'd always go 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. Okay, we're officially live. We're officially live, Facebook and YouTube. Tonight we begin, if everyone should have got it last week, we're beginning a new study and explore the Bible. It's the summer session, and we're going to be in the book of Job and the book of Ecclesiastes. We're going to begin in the book of Job as we... Job's always an interesting book. Brings up some interesting questions. Okay, so you should have, now I've got this teacher's quarterly, so does everybody get a book? Does anybody need a book? I do. You need a book? Okay, hang on a second. No, I got it. Thank you. You're welcome. You got it? Okay, so you should be in the book of Job. If you're watching this on Facebook or YouTube and you don't have a book with us, and then turn to the book of Job, the first chapter is where we're going to begin this evening as we begin this study. As I said earlier, in the book of Job, I can remember as a young child, young Christian, or young at that time just going to church, when the pastor said Job, I kept looking in the Bible trying to find Job, and all of a sudden I said, oh, that Job must be Job. And so... So those who, maybe it's the first time you're looking at the Bible, it's not Job had a job, but Job is the job in the Bible anyway. Okay, so as we begin, as I said, the book of Job, the first chapter, start with me, and I'm going to open the first 5 verses, because he jumps right into verse 8. And to me, he skipped over probably some of the most important verses. The first 2 chapters of this book is written in prose. So he sets the stage in these 2 chapters, and then as we go through the book of Job, you're going to see his friends. There's 3 of them, eventually the 4th one, and they're all debating the issue, why is Job suffering? Of course, as we know, that Job doesn't know. He doesn't know why he's suffering, because he's not read chapter 1 and chapter 2. We have. So all he knows is he's going through the suffering, and he's a good man. And he can't figure out why in the world he's going through this, as we're going to see here in a second. And that's kind of how the book goes all the way through to the end, until you get the last chapter, 38 through 42, I think it is, where God kind of has this final conclusion with Job. Matter of fact, one of my sermons is going to be, we're starting the sermon series this Sunday called Questions. Why we got these questions and God don't answer them? And then when we have questions, does God answer them in His time, or so on? So I'm going to go through about 5 sermons on questions that we have for God. Okay? So Job chapter 1, beginning at Job 1, verse 1, and then I'll pray after we get through these first 5 all the way down to, because he opens with verse 8, if I'm not mistaken. Yep, he begins at verse 8. So we're going to read down to verse 7, and then I'll open in prayer this evening. And then we'll have a prayer session after this evening. Okay, Job chapter 1, verse 1. There was a man in the country of Uz named Job, which they believe that's right around upper tip of Saudi Arabia today, not too far from where Midian, where Moses was in his journey. So there was a man in the country of Uz named Job. He was a man of complete integrity who feared God and turned away from evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. His estate included 7,000 sheep and goats, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen. By the way, oxen is plural if I remember correctly, so that's actually double. So there's 1,000 total there. Okay, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a very large number of servants. Job was the greatest man among all the people of the East. Verse 4. His sons used to take turns having banquets of their homes. Depending on your translation, may say birthday parties in their homes. They would send an invitation to their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. Whenever a round of banqueting was over, Job would send for his children and purify them, rising early in the morning to offer burnt offerings for all of them. For Job thought, perhaps my children have sinned, having cursed God in their hearts. This was Job's regular practice. Verse 6. One day the sons of God, which as you know are angels, and it could be that way in your translation, depending on what translation you have, they may come right out and translate it as angels. One day the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan, and some of your translations may put the article there, the Satan, also came with them. The Lord asked Satan, "Where have you come from?" "From roaming through the earth," Satan answered him, "and walking around on it." Okay? So bow your heads with me now as we open. Heavenly Father, tonight as we look at this faith tested, as we look at your servant Job, and we discover for ourselves what, through the teaching of the Holy Spirit, what we need to see, how we can make the application, maybe not in our own situation, but maybe we have a family member or a friend or a next door neighbor or someone at work that's going through a severe struggle of some type and questioning you, maybe even getting to the point where they're doubting you. So help us be able to see what we need to see, hear what we need to hear, and then make an application in our life. We ask this all in your precious name. And all the saints said, now you've seen the opening 7 verses of the book of Job. Tell me what you know of Job's character and his family life and his blessings.
Extremely blessed with all the land that he owned, all the servants he had, he had a lot of children. Back in that day, it was considered very much blessed to have children.
And think about that. Go ahead, Becky. Was you going to say something?
He was a man of integrity. His kids, not so much.
Okay, he's a man of integrity. And remember, he's not obviously Jesus. He's still, as Paul says, where none of us are righteous. But yes, he had great love. And did you notice something other too? Probably of those of you that are blessed with a fully functioning family. In other words, there's probably not one of us that has any dysfunction in our family, right? Did you notice what his sons and daughters actually got along? You know, because it said 7 sons, which many times in scriptures this is a number of completion. 7 and then 3 actually are 2 sets of numbers. It usually always plays out in scriptures a lot of times. But 7 sons and 3 daughters, and it gave you the idea that they were quite happy with each other. They, actually loved each other. They actually got together and socialized. It said, and of course, like Betty and everyone said, that Job being, especially in this particular time, was more of the family priest, if you want to say it that way. And he worried about his children like we do. And he'd even said there that he would bring them before the Lord and ask for forgiveness for them as the head of their family. Just in case, he said, just in case they cursed God in their hearts, which we see later on was the thing that played out. Okay? So, obviously, as you're reading this, if you're an Israelite, if you're a Jewish person in this particular time frame in history, they looked at this and this guy's blessed. God has passed favor on him immensely. God has poured out his blessings beyond. Job is truly blessed of God. They're reading all this and listening to all this stuff he's blessed with. Of course, we know that Job lives behind a walled city, as we see later on in scriptures. So, the biggest thing that the author, obviously God, is painting a picture here that how blessed on the appearance he is. Because many times we do the same thing. We look at people and say, man, they got all, they got everything, and they never seem to have any problems, never have any family issues, or perfect family, You know what I mean? Debbie and I we joke sometimes when we think about our kids and we'll get around somebody. I had a friend that when I was in the fire department, his son was an Air Force pilot, flew a C-17. His other son was a doctor. And after a while, when they talked about their kids, you want to go, okay, so your kids are perfect, But, kids, grandparents, we're going to be proud. We're proud of our kids, right? So, it's kind of the idea here. The stage is set to show that God's blessing has been poured out on Job. Okay? So, now let's jump in our lesson. As it says in your guys' quarterlies, your lesson, we're going to explore the text now. Matter of fact, somebody was watching Facebook. I'm trying these PowerPoint slides that goes right on Facebook behind my head there, I noticed, so I don't even know if you can read them or not, but I know Debbie Valerie or someone might be watching Facebook this evening, or somebody, or even Carol out in California. If they let me know how those slides look that's being projected behind my head right now. Of course, you guys don't see them, but they're there on Facebook. So I think I got the right slide. See which one we got there. Okay, we're good to go. Okay, so we want to begin. Explore the text. Permission granted. Permission granted. Job chapter 1, verse 8 now. Then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? No one else on the earth is like him, a man of perfect integrity, who fears God and turns away from evil. Satan answered the Lord, does Job fear God for nothing? Verse 10, haven't you placed a hedge around him, his household, and everything he owns? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. Here's the test. But stretch out your hand and strike everything he owns, and he will surely curse you to your face. Okay? So the tests begin. Let me ask you a question. What is the most difficult challenge you have faced? What is the most difficult challenge you have faced?
We had a little girl born with cerebral palsy, she lived to be 20,
Okay.
so never walked, talked. She liked music, knew that. She saw, but to what degree,
Mm-hmm.
it changed her life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyone else?
I would say the death of my husband, because he was so young.
The death of your husband and the child? Okay. Mine was, you heard me say it before, was discovering prostate cancer. Discovering I had prostate cancer. I don't know if I ever shared you with it. You know these famous medical portables that we have nowadays, where you put all your medical records online? Well, when I went in for the famous biopsy test, any man that's ever went through that, it's not fun, by the way. If you've never done it, don't ever. Anyway, they take samples from your prostate, and you can imagine what they have to do that. But anyhow, they took 13 of those little samples, little cores from the prostate. Then I kept going online, and then eventually one night Debbie and I were watching TV, and I went online and read the report, and they said 4 of the 13 had cancer in them, little things, which obviously they give you what they call a Gleason score. Mine was a 7. And at that time, I didn't know if it had spread outside the prostate itself or left the encapsulation and all this other stuff. Debbie was sitting beside me watching TV, and I said, hey, I just nonchalantly, real quiet, I said, just kind of mild, I said, I got prostate cancer. No, you don't. I said, I do. That's what that, he said, maybe you're not a doctor. You don't know what you're reading or whatever. I said, well, you don't have to be a doctor to read the pathology report down at the bottom where he says, prostate cancer, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I didn't need a college education. So when I called the base hospital, because I was, retired military, called the base hospital, I told them that, I'd read the report. Oh, they were real apologetic. Oh, Mr. Kirby, you should have never saw that. You were never meant to. You should have been able to come and see your doctor. I said, well, now have I seen this? Can I come in and see the doctor a little bit earlier now? So I know this. So that was probably the biggest challenge because, going through that and then going through the surgery and then having the complications where I had blood clots and all that other stuff, it puts a challenge on your life, especially at my age, being as young, because I had my uncle, the one you've heard me talk about, was a Methodist minister that I went fishing with. He died of prostate cancer. So you instantly, as soon as you hear that, you instantly think the worst. That, and of course, obviously, it's not with me, meaning the outcome was really good because everything was localized, didn't get outside the prostate and so on and so forth. So last time I went to the urologist, he more or less said, you've been cancer-free for a little over 2 years now. I said, you're probably good to go. Matter of fact, he more or less said, you'll probably die of something else now. So that's kind of a comforting thought. So that was a challenge for, it's a challenge for Debbie and I. It's probably one of the only times I was in the hospital when I had those blood clots in my lungs. She was getting ready to leave to go home. And my heart rate was out. It was a weird night. I just thought it was my night to check out, to be honest with you. And I asked her to stay. I said, why don't you stay with me at the hospital tonight? Just tonight, make sure. Because even the nurses and everybody, they were giving all this blood thinners and all this other stuff. And at that time, they didn't know where the blood clots was. They just knew I threw them. They didn't know if they was in my heart or in my lung or what happened or, where they went. I didn't know that till the next day. So it gives you, coming to Jesus wakes you up real quick. You question a lot of things, as like Ed was talking about with his daughter, and then, of course, Lynn with her young husband. You just don't, that's something other that life just throws you for a loop. I didn't mean to get long there, but anybody else?
Well, I think it's several. A move can be a challenge, a new job, and maybe even retirement can be a challenge. What am I going to do?
Right. Right. Taking your wife to Florida and moving to Florida, too, was taking her away from her grandkids. Of course, you guys heard the story, right? Did you hear she slipped? I heard she was talking on the phone. I don't even know who she's talking to. She said, yeah, I'm down here I'm living his dream with him down here. And I have never let her forget, I've never let her live that down. Anyone else? I didn't mean to hug Betty.
So one of the things I've gone through is my oldest son, who was 8 at the time, was hit by a car.
Okay.
We were in a coma. He had 2 skull fractures, medium concussion, had a broken both bone in his leg.
Wow. 8 years old, you said?
Yeah, they didn't know whether he would make it. His kidneys were starting to shut down.
Wow. Huh.
I can't hear that. You got to speak loud.
Well, hopefully the goal is we're eventually either going to go to Fellowship Hall and start meeting over there so we can have I'm working with Pastor JR right now because I know their kids meet over there. And I got to find out what time they meet. If anything, we may move our time a little bit earlier. And we'll talk about that after I go off Facebook maybe later on. But did he survive? Great. That's good. Was it? So he's probably how old now then? 49, and that happened when he was 8? Really? Wow.
Yeah, she brought him through that so he could challenge me when he was a teenager.
There you go.
Well, he's a special case.
Miss Heather.
This year for school.
This year for school.
I'm taught for 19 years. This was probably the most challenging, hard school year that I've ever taught. Just because between 6 feet apart, having to wear masks all day, kids are wearing masks all day, kids are mentally wired. The staff is mentally wired. I think we finally had our first in-person faculty meeting last week, but we had to split the staff in half. But it's just like WebEx, it's like don't see anybody. I go home exhausted. So I guess for my challenge, it's not as, but that's a challenge. It was a big challenge because I had to do things differently, and I don't feel like some of it was as well as it could have been.
All right.
Hopefully it'll go back to normal next year.
That's right.
Hopefully.
Yeah, we can definitely pray that it's start turning around. Yeah, gosh, I couldn't imagine that putting up with. Well, I couldn't be a teacher anyway, so they would be arresting me probably after the first day and taking me away. So, but yeah. Yeah, gee.
It's challenging and it's overall. Most of
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you wouldn't believe, it's like, oh, I just wish this year's over, wish this year was over. Hopefully it'll be better like we used to have it. On top of all of that, a lot of people at school are moving classrooms and putting in.
So when is the school year officially over? It's not done yet, is it?
No, kids' last day is the 11th of June, mine's 14th.
Okay, so the 11th of June.
About a week and a half from now.
Okay, pray for Heather. This school year gets over for sure.
8 days as of today.
Okay, so we see as I said, that one of the major points is that permission granted. We open with the fact of everything that God had blessed Job with, and then we see the test. Obviously, Job doesn't know this is going on. We do. It's kind of, we get to see that the test is coming and what the test is and who's involved and who's the characters involved and so on. Okay, so but he doesn't know why, because then if you look at verse 12, God then says, very well, the Lord told Satan, everything he owns is in your power. However, do not lay a hand on Job himself. So Satan left the Lord's presence. Now, looking in that verse, what can you discover about God, God and his characters and attributes versus Satan and his character and attributes? What can you see? I'm sorry? The Lord's in control. Right, and he can only do what the Lord allows him to do. He's powerful, but he's not all powerful, meaning Satan. And that's what is implied there. He's called the accuser here in this particular test because he's not necessarily tempting Job. He's more or less accusing him because he's to God. He went to God and said, hey, if you think Job was so great of a guy, let's find out. Let's find if he believes in prosperity gospel or not. Let me have him. And God says, you got my permission to go after him. But what did he say? He let a condition. You can't lay a hand on Job himself. Okay? So now, attack executed in your quarterlies there. Attack executed. Job chapter 1 now, verse 13. One day when Job's sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and reported, now I want you to see this, while the oxen was plowing and the donkeys were grazing nearby, verse 15, the Sabaeans swooped down and took them away, and they struck down the servants with the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. Okay? Number 2, verse 16. He was still speaking. I want you to see that. The first guy that came and told Job, he was just basically finishing up. And the next guy come in and he starts his story. Okay? He was still speaking when another messenger came and reported, God's fire fell from heaven. It burned the sheep and the servants and devoured them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. Verse 17. That messenger was still speaking when yet another came and reported, the Chaldeans formed their 3 bands and made a raid on the camels and took them away. They struck down the servants with the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. Verse 18 and 19 now. Verse 18 and 19. Let me fold this back a little bit so I can read it. He was still speaking when another messenger came and reported, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. Suddenly a powerful wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house. It collapsed on the young people so that they died, and I alone have escaped to tell you. Now, the obvious question as we go into the second one, the obvious question is, well, let me read the question here in the book. It's in your guys' book. Can you imagine what might have gone through Job's thoughts in these moments of tragedy? What are several characteristic responses we might have when tragedy strikes us? Okay? Let me read it again if you don't have it in your book. What page is that on? Because I got the teacher one. It's a different number, Lynn. What's the... Oh, you don't have it? Okay, I'm privileged. I got a question you don't have. Well, then I'm just going to ask my question then, okay? I'll act like it was all my question. It was just my question. It's not the book's. No, anyway, can you imagine what might have gone through Job's thoughts in these moments of tragedy? What are several characteristic responses we might have when tragedy strikes? What are they? Do what, Deb? Why me? What did you do?
You would have to say Job's having one bad day.
You'd have to say it, as Ed said, Job's having one bad day. What else?
Well, maybe after the first one, or maybe definitely after the second one, how much more? Or how many more things are gonna happen?
Right. Yeah. I mean, he could almost go down the list if you think about it. Can you imagine some of the responses that he would have? I mean, he'd blame it on the kids. What did they do? You know, what did they do to cause it? I mean, you could blame it on several different things. Matter of fact, if you go to the father of, I can't even think of it. That's terrible. That's a bad thing about getting older, I guess. You start having that Alzheimer's. I can't think of the evolution. Who was the father of Darwin? Gosh, where's Heather on Facebook here sending me a response? She's here. Darwin came to realization through a tragic event in his own life that he turned against God. Until he had that tragic event, he was a believer in God. But when he did, then he was one of the fathered, if you know it, as we know it, the evolution, the whole concept of, we have evolved and so on millions of years and all this other stuff. So, and then I read somewhere, and I forget, Ted Turner had an event in his life that did the same thing to him, kind of shook him to the point where he turned against God. So you got an opportunity when something like this happens, like Betty had. Go ahead, Becky.
One of the stages of grief is anger.
One of the stages of grief is anger. You're right. You're right. One of your stages of grief is anger. And the bad thing is how that anger goes, which direction it can take. Because Betty, your 8-year-old child going through that, it wouldn't have been hard to really turn against God and blame God at that point in time, or Ed and Gloria in their situation, or even me or Lynn or anyone, especially when you just look at Job and say, what have I done to deserve this? God, you already said earlier, we've seen he was the most, he was the most blessed man of his time in the East, but yet, he didn't do that, did he? Because then if you look now, as you've seen that test, and you go down to the next one, where he does, where he goes, trust maintained. Okay, in your books, trust maintained. Job chapter 1 now, verses 20 through 22. Then Job stood up, tore his robe, shaved his head, and fell to the ground and worshipped, saying, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will leave this life. The Lord gives, and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Verse 22. Throughout all this, Job did not sin or blame God for anything.
In verse 21, he just said, Lord, it's yours.
Yes.
Nothing I can do, that it's all yours, and I trust.
Just turn it over to the Lord 100%. And exactly right. Did he pass the test? Obviously he did. He passed it. He proved the devil wrong, because the devil said, well, Job only worships you for what you bless him with. He don't worship you because you're God. He worships you for what you've been blessed with. So, but then you get the idea of he did have severe mourning, obviously, because you see that in verse 20, when he stood up, tore his robe, shaved his head, and fell to the ground and worshipped. So he wasn't not grieving. I mean, he wasn't, he was impacted, is what I'm trying to say. He was impacted by the event like we were. In other words, he had the national human responses to, as Becky said, he went through those stages of grieving, the anger being this one particular one. but yet at the same time he maintained his composure. Never did once, the scripture implied, never did once say, "Why me, God?" Did you see that anywhere? Go ahead, Deidre. Yes, you're right, Brother Deidre. He said, "Blessed be the name of the Lord." So he even praised him for the tragedy. Wow.
Consider what Satan offers. Satan offers people all kinds of stuff. A lot of musicians get in trouble because they think worldly and that they're going to acquire all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, their life just becomes a turmoil. Usually they get on drugs. Their whole life gets turned upside down because of the hours they work and that kind of thing.
Right.
You could look at all kinds of really great artists that really got their lives messed up.
Right.
God's their only hope.
Right, and when you, like you said, when they receive so many blessings, it absolutely does the opposite effect sometimes, you know.
Job was, if you look at verse 21,
Okay, verse 21.
Job was not a person that staked his whole life on his monetary value.
Okay,
Because he said, I came out of my mother's womb naked, and I returned it. And the challenges, so there was, he was an intelligent person, and that, but his goal in life was not to accumulate all this wealth that he had. You know, that wasn't his objective in life.
mm-hmm.
What I'm trying to say, I'm not too good on it.
Right. Go ahead, Deb. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Ed, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I was just going to piggyback on that, saying that Job knew that God gave him everything he had. So he was obviously walking.
Yeah,
He knew whatever he had was God, not him.
right, right. Now, obviously, Job's the prime example of this story, but there's, you know, you can look at other stories in the Bible that played out the same way. Joseph, for example, you know, even in his tragedies, Joseph still praised the Lord. You know, he even praised God for what he had. Meshach, Radshach, and Abednego. You read the story of them before they went in the fiery furnace. They more or less said, if God, you know, God will protect us, even if he doesn't, that's okay too. So,
Even Jonah with all his fussing
well, yeah, even Jonah with all of his fussing, ultimately that, you know, he,
gave him the shade.
right, right,
Think about Naomi too, and losing her husband and her sons, and going back to where she was born.
right. Miss Lynn's saying Naomi, remember the story of Naomi? You know, the tragedy she had, remember how the book of Ruth opened up? She lost her husband and I think 2 kids, wasn't it? Or at least one, I remember correctly if I remember the story. It's just one? Okay. So she went through this, 2, was it 2 kids? Okay. So I knew that, you know, and here she, like you said, go back and look at her. I mean, she stood to lose everything because without any kind of male protection in her particular historical setting, she'd been destitute, you know. So, but yeah, that's true. You can go through the Bible and there's all kinds of great examples of how even, you know, in tragic situation, how God's was still there, but the people at the same time didn't turn against God. You know, Samuel's mother, Hannah, another illustration. Samuel's mother, you know, pleading to God for a son. If she received a son, she would turn him over to the Lord, which she did with Samuel, as we know from the book of Samuel. So yeah, it's no, I mean, it goes all the way through there. You can just keep talking about that stuff. But Job obviously is the big story we all refer to. When someone talks about the trouble of Job's and they go through tragedy, it's the first person you always think of instantly. And I've even seen that with non-believers, that they may remember enough about the story of Job, they'll even say, you know, I've had the trials of Job, you know. Well, they think they have, that's true. They've not really had true trials. Go ahead, Errol.
But he models what should be our response to adversity.
Mm-hmm.
He makes it look easy, and it's not easy.
No.
But like you said, everybody comes from the Lord. And you don't know why he's doing it. But he wants you to know he'll let you know.
Right. Right.
But
Right.
you need to pray for the Lord.
Right. There you go.
Can I do that? I don't know. We'll find, I hope I don't find out.
No, I had a very learned, very spiritual lady tell Debbie and I, and she used to teach Sunday school up north. She said, be careful what you pray for. If you pray to God for patience, He's liable to give you trials to test the patience. So be careful what you ask God for, because you may get what you want, but not in the way that you thought you were going to receive it. So the best thing we got to remember with God is just pray and trust Him. That's all we can do. Pray and trust Him. The answer will come in God's timing. Just pray and trust Him. Heather?
Like if I ever go through trials, instead of whining and complaining, it's asking God what He's trying to teach me.
There you go. Still whining and crying in trials. Is that what God's, yeah, that's true. What are you trying to test me, or what are you trying to teach me in these trials? Okay.
At that time, Job was the richest man, and everybody knew that. But Job knew that where he got his wealth.
Yep. Matter of fact, as we go through there, and you're right, Ms. Carol, when we go through this is going to be the debate now, of, as we go through the stories with his friends, his four friends, because that's going to be the topic of conversation all the way through here. As he meets with Bildad and Eliphaz and all of them, they're all basically telling him, Job, you're a loser. You've done something to make God awful mad at you. So it's kind of summarized, Yeah. Yeah, when they get to the very end, God kind of brings them back. Okay, and I don't think, and I'm not going to say it's in your guys' book, but in this teacher's book that I have here, he made an interesting kind of summary statement for this whole lesson. He said, and I'll quote from him, "What we learn from this text is that believers show the depth of their faith and adversity." If I could say it, I'm sorry, forgive me, I'll read it again. What we learn from this text is that believers show the depth of their faith in adversity. So adversity is going to show you that, it'd be the litmus test, if you think about it. Think about James. James more or less said, be ready. Matter of fact, wait a minute, the biggest thing what James said, when trials come, you need to celebrate. One of those statements in Scriptures, you're like, what? Yes, Paul does say put on the full armor of God. Okay, any closing thoughts as we kind of wrap this up and I get ready to turn this out? Miltair?
Yes. Number one, my thought number one, this is the mistake many believers make when they pray. When some people pray, they ask God to accomplish things according to their will. However, sometimes the way we want God to do the thing is not the way that we do want that. That's why one believer prays, we can to ask God to do according to His will.
Hmm.
So one the lesson we take out from the text, when we are in the trial, God is still in control.
Hmm.
We can count on the faithfulness of God.
Hmm.
Because there are no trial, no problem is come by mistake. If any trial God comes for the believer, there are something, it's not come out by God.
Hmm.
Because he's in the trial. Because when God wants to use us, God used some trial. It's not God who create the trial, but God can use the trial to make a correction.
Right. Right.
Sometimes when he give a pastor feel a message to give me, when I hear the message, I don't care about the message because in the message, maybe God wants to say something to transform my life. When I can give what God say you to tell me, God do another way hardly. Maybe the hardly, maybe accidentally like, to make a correction, to make you the way God wants me. Because the will of God is make us like Jesus.
Hmm.
If you are a believer, if you are chosen from God do every effort to make you the way He wants. He wants to become like Jesus.
Amen. Amen. Okay, as we wrap this up this week, next week's is, what is it? Let me go in the front of the book here.
This is a very one message like that.
Mhm.
When they are the trial, don't care because God is faithful, God is under control.
Next week, hope defined, Job chapter 14. Now, as you know, he's obviously, you can look at this, he's not going to deal with each chapter each week. But in your quarterly that you have, it sets a reading plan out day by day. I don't know what page it is for you guys, but it's called a Bible reading plan. And it takes you through the book of Job and the book of Ecclesiastes in this quarter, so June, July, and August. So if you want to do that in your daily Bible study, because he breaks it down in such a way that they're not unmanageable. In other words, there's not a lot of verses per day. So if you get a chance, I would highly encourage you to do that, to go through this reading plan as you go. Because like I said, he's going to take big chunks of this text. Obviously, he's going all the way up to chapter 14 next week, okay, with hope defined. And then that's the way I go through there. Okay, any closing thoughts this evening before I turn this off on Facebook? Anybody that's watching this on Facebook or YouTube, you got a prayer request or a praise or anything, shoot them off and we'll pull them off of Facebook or YouTube and make sure we talk about them this evening in our prayer time. Okay?